We are about to begin the Veterans History Project interview. My name is Tony Kierna. I am the genealogy coordinator of the Schaumburg Township District Library in Schaumburg, Illinois. I will be interviewing Colonel Jill Morgenthaler, U.S. Army, retired, regarding her military service. Today's date is December the 27th, 2018. The interview is being conducted in the Schaumburg Township District Library TV studio. Also present in the room is Megan Swarak, the Department Director of Reference of the Schaumburg Township District Library. Colonel Morgenthaler, thank you for participating in the Veterans History Project. Thank you again for your military service. It is a privilege and an honor to conduct this interview with you. Can we give us some background on yourself? Where were you born?
I was born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
And
my father was a Marine.
And in what year were you born?
1954.
Okay. And your background, how about your parents? What are their names?
Wendell P.C. Morgenthaler Jr. and my mother was Joyce Harvey Morgenthaler.
Okay. And how about siblings?
I am the oldest of four, and my sister Terry, my brother Jeffrey, and my youngest sister Sharon Morgenthaler.
Okay. And what was it, how about your background in school? Grammar school, high school?
I went to 13 different schools growing up because my father was a Marine. The hardest time we had was the year he went to the Vietnam War. The Marine Corps kicked us out of Quantico, and my mother took us up to New Hampshire where her mother was, and we were Southern military brats, as we call us ourselves, thrown into a New England situation that was very anti-war, very disrespectful of people who were serving. And I just found that was a very tough year, having my father both gone to war and then being kind of in a hostile situation.
It's sad to hear, but we know that that's the reality of the times.
That was the reality. I mean, the Vietnam War did a lot of damage to our social fabric.
Mm-hmm. And what was the high school that you went to? Or can you mention some of the high schools that you may have gone to?
Sure. I went to Concord High School, and then I went to West Springfield High School in Virginia.
Okay. And then what was the transition from high school to college?
I got a 4-year Army ROTC scholarship for Penn State. I was part of the first experimental class of women actually training with men in the Reserve Officer Training Corps. And ROTC is it's an educational program on a campus. You learn military history, law, you learn military drill and ceremony at the same time as you're going to school for your degree.
Okay.
So it's kind of a parallel track during that.
So when you're going to Penn State, you're actually taking non-military courses in addition to the military courses.
Right, exactly.
And all within the same 4-year period, you're supposed to get all that done?
Right, so it was 2 more classes than other people had.
Okay. And I think too, what was the process of like training? Were you actually going through any kind of training while you were in the ROTC at Penn State?
Yeah, we would go to Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania and train. We learned how to shoot our M14s, I believe it was back then, not M16s. We learned how to map read. We did all of that on weekends. And then during, 1 day a week, we studied military history, military command, etc.
Okay. Even before we go a little further on that, what was the driving force behind your interest in getting into the military?
My father was working at the Pentagon doing military intelligence. He was an infantry Marine officer, but they assigned him to military intelligence, and he would come home at night and he couldn't tell us what he was doing and what he was watching. And I thought that was so cool. So one day at Penn State, soon after I arrived, I just walked up to the ROTC building. I walked into the Army group, and I just said, I'd like to go into the Army as a military intelligence officer. I'd like to be a spy. And they're like, sure, honey, just sign here. And I did. And then they're like, would you like to try for a scholarship? I'm like, sure. So I was one of 10 women across the nation to get the first scholarships. Wow. Fortunately, 4 years later, I did get military intelligence, but I was not a spy. I was an electronic warfare officer.
And your entry into the program, you said this was at the very beginning when women were being allowed to come into the ROTC or into?
Well, in the past, women have served in some ROTCs at colleges, but they were not going into the Army. This was the first time they actually integrated training for women and men and because they were closing out the WAC Corps, the Women Auxiliary Corps, and totally integrating us. So I was the first class of integration,
Okay.
where we trained together with the goal of entering the military as officers.
And being that very first class, how did that feel for you trying to break through in such a hard environment? You're sort of like the guinea pigs at that time.
Penn State was fine. We had some great instructors. ROTC summer camp. After your junior year, you go off to leadership summer camp. That was tough because it was like every man was coming after us. There were 83 of us in that experiment, and we were at Fort Bragg, over 50,000 men.
Okay.
And they did not want us. The West Point officers were furious because women were about to start West Point that fall.
Okay.
And they couldn't stop it. The enlisted were furious. They didn't want to take orders from a skirt. And my peers were furious because they thought we would get all the cushy jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So every day it was a struggle. And then when I entered as a brand new officer, every day was a struggle just to get saluted, just to be shown the respect that the rank was due.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a tough road to hoe, it seems like, as far as that goes.
Some days I want to hide.
So now let's say you were coming near your time at Penn State, you were approaching the point when you'd be graduating from there.
Mm-hmm.
What was the next steps or the plans for you to evolve into selecting or getting into what you wanted to do?
Well, you put down what branches you want to enter, military intelligence, military police, signal corps, and I put down military intelligence. I also got what is known as an RA commission, regular Army, which meant I was one of the top cadets, and I would be going in with my full career, not as a reserve soldier, but it's a designation just showing that the Army would like you to consider this as a full career.
Okay.
So I entered as a second lieutenant RA, military intelligence. I owed the Army 4 years of active duty because of my 4-year scholarship.
Okay.
I ended up staying 5 years, and then I ended up coming back to America to civilian life, but staying in the reserves another 25 years.
Okay. What was the beginning of training like when you were finally getting into the intelligence areas?
I found it fascinating because we were in the Cold War. Times were very strained with the United States and North Korea. Times were very strained with us and the Soviet Union at that time. So being a military intelligence officer and watching a lot of it, it was very exciting. And it was exciting to kind of be in the know, to have the clearance, to know what was going on. It was also very scary. There's a few times it looked like we might go to war. Of course, I knew that with my soldiers sooner than most people did.
Okay. And give us an idea, where were you stationed for all these training things that you were learning for the process of intelligence?
So for military intelligence officer basic, I was at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. And then for the signal intelligence and later on tactical intelligence training, I was at Fort Devens, Massachusetts in Ayers. That one has closed down since then. It's been consolidated with Fort Huachuca.
Okay.
And then my first assignment in Korea, I actually was responsible for inspecting every single military post for the security of their crypto gear and ciphers and codes.
Wow.
So I saw the whole country. I was also the threat briefer. My responsibility was to go to every unit and brief on the electronic threat we faced from the Chinese, the North Koreans, and the Soviets.
And what do you mean by the electronic threat? What was that?
Monitoring our equipment, monitoring communications, Morse code, voice, codes and ciphers, triangulating so you can figure out where the enemy is actually on the radio, where are they communicating from? Okay. Or you'd watch all of a sudden what we call chatter would increase. Was that a movement of units going somewhere and they're all reporting into the command?
Were you at that time, were we developing then the satellite capabilities at that time? Was it sort of, that was a whole nother fresh?
That was just starting around 1980. Was starting, and that of course was a time President Reagan was starting to talk about Star Wars.
Okay.
And getting some kind of shield around us.
Okay. And so when you were in Korea then, how long were you in Korea doing the position that you were in?
I was there for 1 year.
Okay. And what was sort of next online? Did you have the choice to start moving into other areas of intelligence, or was there a set fixed path that you would progress through?
It was pretty narrow. Because I was in Korea, which was considered a hardship tour, I got the next assignment of my choice, and I wanted Germany. And so I did what was unusual. It's called an inter-theater transfer. But they kept me in the same area of signal operations security. That's what I ended up in.
Okay.
So even though I'd been trained for electronic warfare, I kept doing security. And I did security for 4 years in Europe too, which is one of the reasons why I got out. I was bored with monitoring our people.
Once you were doing the intelligence work, did you feel that maybe there was another pathway to pick another part of the military that you would like to try and get into?
I tried to. I tried to go the foreign area officer option, but I was turned down.
Okay.
So I stayed in intelligence until I went in the reserves. And then from the reserves, I ended up going into psychological operations, and then later on civil affairs, which is rebuilding nations. And I love that mission.
Okay. What did you do for fun in places like Korea?
Oh, I traveled. Nobody would go to Thailand with me, so I went by myself, 22 years old, and I went to Hong Kong by myself.
Wow.
That's why I joined the Army, was to see the world. I wasn't going to just sit on an Army base.
How about communications with your family back home? Were you getting frequent letters? Because that was obviously before the internet and before all the electronics, I think, that we had.
Yeah, mostly letters. Once in a while you could get on what was known as the Mars satellite phone system. You could call back. That was very rare.
Okay.
So most of it was letters.
And let's going back a little bit to the beginning, of the 83 women that were initially in that, did that become sort of a group of friends of yours or contacts as you all progressed through?
Just a few of us stayed in touch. I believe I was the only one two of us made full colonel.
Okay.
And most women got out as captains when they were choosing to have families.
But overall, was it then pretty successful that of the 83 that were in, pretty much all of them were staying on in the service?
They stayed on at least a minimum period. But like I said, most of them, when it came time to captain, it was, do they want a family or do they want the Army?
Okay.
I stayed in saying, I can do both.
Okay.
And I really didn't have a family till I was a major.
Okay. When in Korea, were you involved in any, did they ever have these real crises come up or something at the border?
Yeah, I was there right after the North Koreans had chopped to death a lieutenant and captain in the DMZ, the demilitarized zone.
Wow.
We had a helicopter shot down. So that's why at one point it did look like we were going to go to war with North Korea because of the escalation of what was going on around the DMZ. We didn't go to war, which was a good thing, but it was very scary because men kept telling me that women aren't in combat. The whole country of Korea was in the Korean War. Mm-hmm. The whole country would have been, so don't tell me women aren't in combat.
Yeah. And early on when you were in Korea, because that was sort of the beginning as you started moving up the ranks, how was it interacting with men? How did they interact with you in the formal way that the Army would require and stuff?
Well, I used to find that almost every day someone would try not to salute me, and I would have to correct his behavior because you are saluting the rank, not the person. Okay. Sometimes men would try and get away with calling me names, a butch or a bimbo, and I'd say, no, I'm an officer in the United States Army, and then they would straighten up.
And yet they probably wouldn't do the same to a male commander.
No, they might try to avoid saluting a male second lieutenant, but they would not be calling a male officer names or trying inappropriate touch.
Was there punishment for them, or was it just that you tried to get them to do the respect to you at that time, and then they sort of got into the routine of doing it?
Yeah, one day, one sergeant didn't salute me, so I stopped him, and I made him salute me 5 minutes over and over and over again. And word got around the post. There's only 3 women officers in I Corps.
Okay. And I Corps Korea, where you were at? Okay.
That was our headquarters. And word got around that if you didn't salute Lieutenant Morgenthaler, half your life was gone. And so after that incident, I didn't have a problem. So I found humor was the best way.
Oh, that's good.
And it was too small of a battle.
Yeah.
There are bigger battles than saluting,
Yeah.
Wow.
So now, how long were you in Korea?
Full year.
Okay. And what was next in line for you? Where did you
Then I
train?
went back for some more military intelligence training at Fort Devens, and then I headed to Europe. I went to first Munich, West Germany, where I was an executive officer of a headquarters company for the Military Intelligence Brigade. That was a great job. I was in charge of making sure all our soldiers were trained, fed, healthy for combat. I had a great commander I worked with and a great first sergeant. I lucked out. The men I worked for wanted me to succeed. Not all the women could say that.
Okay.
But I was lucky in that sense. And I just learned a lot about leadership. And then I was given my own military intelligence unit to command, first in Pirmasens, which is the border of France, and then up in Berlin, which is kind of the creme de la creme.
So there were many equivalents of you, like rank and knowledge and intelligence spread around other parts of the world representing the military and stuff like that. Okay. And did you ever have to coordinate all kinds of things between them? Or was it pretty much where you were, that was your focus?
Yeah, that was my focus. Higher commands coordinated, but not at the level of a lieutenant or a captain.
Okay. So after Korea, it was Germany, and how long over there?
I was there for 4 years.
Okay. And fun things you did there?
I traveled all around Europe. I got to Greece and Tunisia, France and Amsterdam. Started my master's over there. Just had a lot of fun, made some really good German friends while I was there. Okay. Definitely improved my German to the point that I could fool a German for a while that I was a German.
Wow, that's pretty good. Any vivid memories of any occurrences or special things that occurred in Germany or even in Korea?
Yeah. Well, in West Berlin, one day there was a young lieutenant who ran the post office bragging that he could get us Soviet souvenirs. When we used to go through the checkpoints, the Soviets would, if you left out a Playboy on your windshield, they'd take the Playboy, give you a belt buckle. And I'm like, I don't need any belt buckles. And he said, no, I can get you fur hats and fur coats. And my whole military intelligence.
Wait, this was the German equivalent of you who was able to get this for you?
No, this was an American.
An American, okay.
American lieutenant who ran the post office.
Okay.
So it didn't make any sense. And I just, of course, it's too good to be true. So why are the Soviets playing him? What do they think they can get from him? Okay. So I started doing what they did. I started charming him. Oh, you're so great. What else can you get me? And I just did what they did, only it was coming from a cute senior officer versus, I don't know who the Russian was that was dealing with them. And he finally confessed that they were also going to give his brother a tour of Eastern Europe, communist Europe. And I asked him, well, what does he do? And, oh, he's a satellite engineer out of California. And that's when I thought, oh, that's what the Soviets are going to get from him, his brother. Oh. So after I was done talking to him, as soon as I got outside, I ran up to the headquarters building. I ran into the colonel who ran Operation Security, and I was like, sir, you're not going to believe what's going on with the Soviets. And after I told him, the FBI swept up his brother in California to keep him safe. Military intelligence spirited the lieutenant somewhere to keep him safe, and I wasn't allowed to tell the story for 30 years.
Wow. So we're honored to be able to hear it now.
Yes.
So literally you were able to sense that something just wasn't quite right, and you had the foresight to be able to convey that, and then
right.
And did it actually turn out that was probably going to happen, or
yes.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So we would have lost our technology edge.
Oh man, that's a shock to hear. Yeah. I mean, but it's pretty good, an astute observation on your part to really been able to figure that one out and stuff.
And I think part of it was because I was a woman. You know, I outranked him. I'm flirting with him. He's getting all puffed up. I don't think a guy would have gotten it out of him.
Wow.
But he wanted to show off to me.
So now, what years were you in Germany?
I was there in 1977 to 1981.
Okay. Well, that's good number of years. And you now what rank were you at this point?
I was promoted to first lieutenant and then to captain.
Okay. And is it sort of within the Army or any military organization, is there sort of a timeline of progress?
Yeah, as long as you are doing your career well, your education well, there are certain times that you will come up, and if you don't blow it, you will get promoted.
Okay. So now after Germany, what was next in line for you?
After Germany, when I was turned down to be a foreign area officer.
Did they give you a reason why you were turned down?
No, not really. Two things happened, actually, that kind of made me decide to get off of active duty. One was that, but the other one was I asked to extend in Europe and be a commander along the Czechoslovakian border.
Okay.
And they said, no, we've had a woman commander there, and she failed. And I said, well, what happened? They said, well, she was dating her sergeant, which isn't allowed, and she was a drunk. And I said, well, that's not me at all. And they said, well, we're not going to risk it again with another woman. And I thought, we've got men who are drunks, and you don't paintbrush every man because of one man. And that's when I thought, yeah, maybe it's time to try the civilian world, but stay in the reserves so I can serve my country when it needed. Okay.
And what is it in the reserves? What's the rules and process for when you say I'm going to go into the reserves? What's your obligations then?
I had fulfilled my obligation by doing 5 years. So from that point on, it was, as an officer, just stay until either I don't get promoted or I decide to resign or later on retire. It's not like enlisted where you keep re-enlisting. As an officer, you just basically stay in until either the Army says you're going nowhere else or you say, okay, time to step out of this.
Okay. During this time, Korea, Germany, did you get any time to come back home and then head back there to Germany to, you know, some...
Yeah, in Korea I didn't, but in Germany I got to come home one time.
Okay.
And I also had my mother and my sisters come out and visit me there.
Okay.
So that was fun.
Okay. So what was next again after Germany?
I ended up going to graduate school in Monterey, California, Monterey Institute of International Studies. Wanted to continue the international side. I decided to study Chinese because when I took the Army aptitude test, it said I could study any language. So I went for the hardest.
I was going to say, that's got to be a challenge.
It was tough, especially because I'm a little tone deaf.
Because even in the Chinese language, aren't there all the different varieties of Chinese languages, I thought?
And we had to learn two kinds of characters, simplified and traditional, and then we're learning Mandarin, but if Cantonese is totally different from Mandarin. And
this was, again, all related to the intelligence work background, or was this something, a different pathway?
This was my civilian path. I wanted to do international business with maybe China. And then I joined a reserve unit in Monterey. I actually ended up being an instructor at the intelligence school down in Anaheim during the summer for 2 summers, which was fun, teaching military intelligence there.
So can you give anyone listening to this any Mandarin or?
Ni hao, hen hao, Nina. How are you? I'm fine. How are you?
Thank you for that. And so what was next in line for you after that? Now, were you still at a level of captain at this point?
Yes, I was still captain. I ended up moving up to San Francisco after I finished graduate school, got my master's in arts, and went up to San Francisco. Economy was in a bit of a slump. So it was,
what year period was this?
That would have been 1983.
Okay.
So I went to grad school 1981 to 83. 83, there was an economic slump, so it was difficult. I had more experience than a lot of the kids who went just directly from undergraduate to master's. But what I found was because there were no women really in the military, when I'd show up for interviews, their faces would change. And I'd realize whatever they were expecting, it wasn't me. And finally, one guy said, I didn't know what to expect. I thought maybe it'd be kind of like a gorilla walking in, dragging the knuckles. I'm like, yeah, no, that's not me. So there's a lot of stereotypes out there that, you know, were facing me too. People just didn't grasp. A lot of people say, why are you in the Army? Can't you do something else? Well, yes, I can. this is who I am.
Mhm.
And they didn't understand that.
It almost still seems that between the time you entered that one of 83 women and 75 or thereabouts till the 1983 period, it doesn't seem like there was a dramatic change.
No, I mean, and I would still be the only woman in a unit. I'd still be the only woman that men worked for. Once I got married, my husband would be the only male spouse at an event. And it really wasn't until the Iraq War when there were finally other women at a bigger number.
Okay.
I walked into the bathroom and there were other women there, and I just said, it's about time, because I was so used to having the bathroom to myself and no one I could share my problems with.
But it was Iraq soon after the San Francisco? There was still a ways to go yet,
That's
right?
a ways
So what was after San Francisco?
After San Francisco, I went into in San Francisco, I went into a psychological operations unit. We did a lot of training in Asia. And I also started my civilian career, ended up working for Department of Commerce and International Trade, doing business with China.
Okay.
So I stayed there and then ended up working for a high-tech firm in Silicon Valley. Right when laptops were coming out, only they weren't laptops, they were, they looked like sewing machines.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was at that cutting edge. And then I met my husband, and we got married, and he took a job with Rand McNally. He's a map maker. So that brought us to Illinois, and we had a 1-year-old son at that time.
Okay.
And I was fortunate. I got a wonderful job at Argonne National Laboratory on my civilian side. And on my military side, I ended up going civil affairs, rebuilding nations, which is what I loved.
Okay. Why did you love that?
It was international work with all kinds of organizations, United Nations, nonprofits, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, different languages. I was sent to Bosnia.
Okay.
I at one point.
So was Bosnia considered building the country back up?
Yes, it was 1996. Right when NATO came in, because the United Nations failed in separating the warring parties.
Okay.
So 1996. I actually was brought in, though, as a public affairs officer because that's what I did at Argonne. And they needed public affairs officers who could understand other countries. So I had the right degrees and experience. And so I ended up running the Coalition Press Information Center, and I ended up leading soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen from 17 nations.
Wow.
Fabulous job in Sarajevo.
Wow.
Yeah, loved it.
And how long were you there?
I was there a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was, again, during what we would call the peacekeeping time
Yes,
in Bosnia?
that was a peacekeeping operation.
Okay. All right. And what was sort of next? So were you still at this level of captain?
No, by that point I was a lieutenant colonel.
Okay.
So during the peacetime, I didn't get to the first Gulf War. I was on the list to be the second wave, but we had no second wave.
Because we were so successful in the first one.
64 days. So.
Wow.
So
and what position would it have been on the second wave had you been coming in?
I was told I was going to run a POW camp, and I just remember looking at the commander going, what are you talking about? I don't have military police background. I don't have prison background. He goes, Morgenthaler, you can do anything. I'm like,
wow.
okay, as long as I have bodyguards, that's the Army. You can do it.
Yeah. So again, in Bosnia, you were there for a year?
Yeah, Bosnia is there.
And then back home, it's still in the reserves at this point, and branching out into some of the other areas of your knowledge and stuff like that. What was next in line for you after that point?
When I finished up Bosnia, I ended up being a staff officer back at Civil Affairs, and then I ended up. Let me start over. So I was commanding a press camp. That's a public affairs unit before Bosnia.
Okay.
I got called up as an individual augmentee. So I spent the year there, and then I came back and took over my command of the press camp and was a far better commander because I now had real life experience. So I commanded there for another 2 or 3 years. Then I ended up going into a school brigade. I ended up actually 84th Division. It runs all the professional schools. I was a staff officer there running the IT. And then I put in for a command and received a brigade command where I was oversaw all the professional schools for soldiers, Sergeant Major's Academy, Drill Sergeant's Academy, the advanced course, for captains, and the majors course, which was a great command. Got to work with great soldiers/instructors. And then I got called up for Iraq, once again for public affairs. Went over there for a year. And when I came back, I ended up being a strategic operations officer until I retired in 2006.
So between Bosnia and the beginning of Iraq, when you were there, any close calls did you have?
Oh, Bosnia, we came under fire at one point. Between the two warring parties were shooting at each other, but we were right in the middle.
And that was the function of why you were there for, to be peacekeepers between them.
And separate them. And so we came under fire, and without thinking, I just hit the ground, had my weapon locked and loaded, and was ready. And then after it was over, I realized, oh, I did everything right. Training kicked in. And then I'm looking at the 9mm going, oh, I was...
I've asked this of many other veterans I've interviewed. Did you have any good luck charms with you?
No.
No? So far, I've not had anyone tell me that they've had a good luck charm.
Oh, okay. I was wondering about that. I mean, my mother did send me a little cross.
Okay.
Same cross she had given my father for Vietnam. So I had that on my dog tag.
Okay.
But, I wasn't running around saying, I have this good luck charm.
When you were in Iraq now, where were you, in Baghdad?
Yeah, I was in Baghdad. I was running all the public affairs for the 4-star commanding general, for General Sanchez. And I did get caught up in the really ugly Abu Ghraib prison scandal.
In what way?
I was the spokesperson. Wow. So yes, so I just kept digging out the truth and pushing it out because we had suppressed it so long. We lost so much of our credibility because we just didn't tell the story back at the beginning.
And was there an opportunity to tell it at the beginning?
Yes. When all these photographs came out and Department of Defense suppressed them, what they should have done was release them when they came out and said, hey, we had something terrible happen. These 7 soldiers did it. Here it is. They sat on it for over 6 months. So when it finally came out, it was like...
How did those photos get released? Was it through the individual servicemen, or was it through...
Yes. So these 7 were doing these terrible things in the middle of the night at Abu Ghraib, and they were taking photographs. And one day, a young man who had nothing to do with that happened to say to somebody, oh, I wish I had more photographs, to send home. Mm-hmm. And they said, oh, here's a disc. And on the disc were all these disgusting things they were doing. So first, he anonymously put it under the door of the military police.
Okay.
And then once they started investigating, he came forward and said, yes, that was me, because I know this is wrong. And it all got suppressed. And then 5 months later, it exploded, and we lost so much credibility.
So it almost really sounds, that was a really big turning point for our credibility and just for how we were viewed there.
We lost our, because we were bringing freedom there. We were bringing freedom of religion, the right to vote, freedom of press, all these things we were bringing there. The technology in that country was like 30 years behind the times. We were bringing that in. All of that just wiped away.
Wow. So what was the continuation of your story then in Iraq? What was after that?
Well, once I finished in Iraq, I returned back to Argonne National Laboratory. It was 2004 going on 2005. I knew my retirement was coming up. So I went back to my reserve unit, and I was restless at Argonne because here I'd been living this exciting on the edge life. And all of a sudden I'm not a scientist, so I'm just doing the mundane, everyday business stuff.
And again, still in the reserves.
Yeah, still in the reserves. Running a strategic center on what kind of education and things do we need to have our soldiers be doing to keep doing these kind of operations. So it was interesting, but not exciting. And then I got a call from the governor's office of Illinois after Katrina.
Who was the governor at the time?
Governor Blagojevich.
Oh, okay.
He no longer wanted a politician running Homeland Security after Katrina. So the chief of staff who called me asked if they could consider me And I said, well, yes. And by the way, at Argonne, one of my extra duties is being the emergency response, and I've taken all the courses.
Okay.
And so I went in for an interview and ended up leaving Argonne and running Homeland Security for the state of Illinois for almost 3 years. And then
Wow.
the governor went to prison, and I was out of a job.
You know, it's almost like, I don't know that even myself, would I think that there's an equivalent of an Illinois or any individual state representative for Homeland Security.
Yeah, every state has one.
So it was an all-encompassing security thing then?
Yeah, I oversaw 9 agencies, National Guard, State Fire Marshal, State Police, Public Health, Veterans Affairs, Juvenile Justice, and something else.
And during that time when you were doing that for Illinois, any really crazy things that happened that you were then really in the focus?
Yes, we had a killer tornado come through. It came through Missouri into Illinois. It actually took out part of our state government because it struck the state government buildings. So we were running that. At the same time I'm running that, I had no idea if the house I had in Springfield was still standing. I was on the Weather Channel explaining that whole thing.
Wow.
And that summer we also had a terrible heat wave and a tornado in East St. Louis, which of course is a very poor area. Mm-hmm. And so we had to run, we had to work with American Red Cross and other nonprofits, worked with the National Guard to make sure we had water and milk and had cooling stations for people to go to and survive at. And at the same time, we were dealing with all this debris and garbage knocked down because of the tornado. Mother Nature was our biggest threat.
Okay. Any other actual terrorist kind of threats that you were made aware of, specific maybe to Illinois?
There was one. I got a call at midnight from the FBI. There were some terrorists down in Florida who were targeting federal buildings, a federal building, courthouse in Florida, but they also had Sears Tower, Willis Tower on their list. So they called me up and briefed me, and they said, well, I said, well, what are you doing with, and they said, well, we're going to let the governor of Florida know. We're going to go in and brief him on the threat. And I said, okay, fine. Then when are you briefing the governor of Illinois? It's not really a threat. I said, no. If you brief the governor of Florida, you brief the governor of Illinois. And so we all met at 10 a.m. with the governor, and the FBI is recommending what we could do. And he turned to me and he said, so do you agree, Colonel? And inside I'm like, this is so cool. I'm here with the FBI. It's anti-terrorism. He wants my advice. And on the outside I said, yes, sir. It's very good advice.
Wow.
And it's like, wow. I never thought life would take me there.
And now, did you leave the agency, or did you say it was related to Governor Blagojevich when he had his troubles?
When he had his troubles, I realized it was time to leave. And so I left, and I found I was not able to get job interviews because I had worked for him. Oh. But what I did find is people kept asking me to speak on leadership. Okay. And that's when I found the time to also write my book.
Okay.
So that helped me. And I got a very nice advance from McGraw-Hill, so kept my head above water.
Okay.
And now I'm traveling internationally, speaking on leadership and resilience.
Was this the end part of your involvement with the reserves? Were you then officially retired?
Yes, I retired in 2006, and I went to the governor's office in 2005, so that was right about the same time.
I do have to ask you one thing, because for the audience that's listening to this, I actually have read Colonel Morgenthaler's book. Didn't you have one thing going on still in Iraq or something that I thought I remembered that was related to Saddam Hussein? Oh,
well, I met Saddam Hussein. I was in charge of all the international media being brought into his...
And this was during his trial?
Right, during his first trial on his crimes against humanity. And the State Department had me wearing civilian clothes. So when he went into the courtroom, he didn't...
But you were still in the military at this point?
As a full colonel, yeah, working for the 4-star general.
Okay.
But he went to the courtroom. He went in very scared. I think he thought he was going to die that day, and he didn't. When he came out, he was very arrogant. He had yelled at the judge. He threatened to kill everybody in the room. He was coming back. And then he saw me standing there in a long sleeve blouse, a long skirt, and combat boots. And he just checked me out. He was stripping me like I was some blonde bimbo. And I thought, no way. He might not know I'm a colonel. I know I'm a colonel. And I just stepped in his space and looked at him and said, bring it on.
Did you ever have to actually interact with him, or was this
Just-
sort of
just
from a
this-
distance?
It was
sort of-
right face to face.
Okay.
Yeah, and he backed off, and then he ordered the guards to kill me. And the guards and I burst out laughing.
Now wait, you mean our U.S. guards or
No,
his
guards.
his guards, the
His
Iraqi guards?
He ordered them to kill me in Arabic. And they burst out laughing. I said, well, what did he say? And they said, kill you. And I go, oh, and I burst out laughing too. It's like, well, I guess he's forgotten where he's now going back to.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because he used to kill people for staring at him. And of course, I was in his face.
So the part of when you were there dealing with Saddam Hussein and that was still like disseminating information that you had
that
to.
was part of my, that was part of my whole year there.
Was it basically like reporting on the trial?
Yeah, I mean, we wanted the international media in the courtroom, so I was responsible for getting them in there. We ran what you call press pools. So, we had to make sure we had someone from TV, someone from radio, someone from print, who would share with everybody else because the courtroom was not very large.
Okay.
We also had like Al Jazeera in the room, Al Iraqia and others. So that was my job, is getting all the media together, getting them into the room. He comes in, getting them out. The other trial, I met, it's not in my book, I met Chemical Ali. He was the one who had over 100,000 Iraqi Kurds killed through biological warfare. He was a little guy. And they took him into the courtroom. And I thought, what a small little guy for being so evil. And then they brought him out at a certain point, took him into the men's room, the two Iraqi guards. And all of a sudden I heard him screaming. And I'm like, what's going on? Should I get involved? And the guards bring him out. And I'm like, gentlemen, what just happened? And they said, well, we had to give him his diabetes shot. And every time we give him a shot, he thinks we're killing him. And I just said, good.
That is
a coward.
I mean, I'm glad you even brought that up because you're right. In the book, I know you mentioned about Saddam Hussein and that, and so did you have any others, or was that near the end of your?
No, that was near the end of my tour. There were others, but I was those were the only two I was involved with. I don't think there was a third. If there was, it made no impression on me.
Okay, that was still during what was really a very dangerous time in Baghdad.
Yeah,
I think.
car
Any
bombs.
close calls you had there?
Yes, I was out at one of the military police stops. We had a barrier, and a car bomb went off, and the shock wave knocked me off my feet. But otherwise, I was okay. So were the military police officers. But on the other side, all these young men had been killed who had been waiting in line to join the police force. I suffer headaches still, which I think might have come from a neck injury that might have come from that event. It's kind of hard to say, but I did come back with a neck that was really killing me. That was probably my only close call. We saw a lot of stuff though on the road. It'd be like right after something happened, we'd pass it by. I remember once we got caught, our convoy in traffic congestion, and that's just scary because you can't move. And one Iraqi guy looked at me and went like this, and I just went like that. It's like, whatever, dude.
Oh my gosh.
We're only armed to the teeth here.
So now is this coming near the end of your actual military service? You were going to be retiring?
I really had just about a year and a half left of military service to get my full 30 years in as a colonel.
Okay. And so what was next in line for you after that? Was it completely then civilian life for you? And
Retired, civilian life.
And then sort of a quiet life? Or as quiet in compared to what you were involved in?
Yeah. At one point, the Army talked about pulling me out of retirement and sending me to Afghanistan, but there was a drawdown of the troops, so it didn't happen. And to be honest, I'm relieved.
But wasn't it you were officially out of the military?
I was retired.
So because you were, is that still the connection with being a reservist, that they could pull you back
Well, it would be a voluntary pool.
Okay.
And of course, if the Army asked me, I say yes. but I was glad when it did not become an
Okay,
option.
okay.
Because I just thought, I don't really want to put my family through this again.
Yeah.
You know, it's worse for them than it was for me.
And again, would it have been in what capacity that they were trying
Oh,
to
it was a
pull you in?
liaisoning with the State Department over there. It would have been a very interesting job,
Okay.
but I'm glad it didn't happen.
All right, so at this point now, is it official that you retired?
Mhm.
And so tell us all at that point now, what things have you been involved in since?
So after I wrote my book, I found I was getting a lot of professional speaking gigs and realized that I could make a life doing this. And so from about 2000, well, I left about 2008 or 9, I left the government. About 2010, I started doing this. I first tried it as a Homeland Security consultant. It didn't work well because the jobs were in DC and I'm in Chicago.
Okay.
But when I switched it to leadership, all of a sudden I was getting women's organizations, trade unions, associations, all kinds of groups hiring me, and having the book just made me really legitimate. Okay. 30 years and 3 commands wasn't enough. Having the book was. And then around 2012, I was making a livable wage, and now I'm able to say no to some jobs.
Is it fair to say that at the level you retired as a full colonel, are you one of a very few number of women who actually did that?
Right. There's 1 or 2 women general officers, but they are not. I think they're very selective in who they speak to. Where this is my life. This is what I want to do. I love it. My husband says I come home looking 10 years younger. So I'm living my passion now. So, and I'm a very funny person, and I have these unique stories. So, but I relate them to the universal messages. Yeah. And so it's going very well. 1 week coming up, I will be in New Orleans, Hershey, Pennsylvania, Michigan State. That's 1 week.
Okay, wow. Does anybody that you've met when you're doing your leadership programs and that, does anybody stick out in your mind like they really were sort of like, on the cusp, they weren't really a great leader of anything, but then dealing with you, working with you, they've blossomed into something?
Well, I met one young technical guy who heard me speak, and he sent me an email and said, I never thought I could lead, but you really inspired me, and I'm stepping forward now at my company. Okay. So he goes, it's doable, and it is. And so that really meant a lot, especially, and I do get, people who've read my books will send me emails. How one woman told me she's got Post-it notes all over the book to remind herself she's dealing with a difficult boss. And she went back to that chapter, dealing with difficult people, and has started to apply these things, and it's all getting better. So I love it when people take the time to say, hey, you did change my life.
How about any existing female military officers? Do they knock on your door for maybe some leadership assessment and skills?
Well, I'm mentoring one young woman who's a young lieutenant. People were telling her, giving her advice, take this Pentagon assignment. And I told her, no, not as a lieutenant. You don't go to the Pentagon. Lieutenant colonels serve coffee in the Pentagon. As a lieutenant, I said, you get out in the field. You really learn the Army as a lieutenant. Yeah. And then as a captain, get in the field. And that's going to make you a far better officer, and you will have a better career. And she took my advice.
So how did just being in the service overall, how did that affect your life? What did you gather from all of that?
Well, a lot of people say women shouldn't serve. It's my DNA. Whether, my father served, both my grandfathers served, it's who I am. And my biggest sense of rewards was when I was a commander. And I got to set the vision and get the mission and work with all these great soldiers, and we achieved good things. Such a sense of accomplishment. And then now I can take all these hard things I learned the hard way, sometimes the wrong way, and make it easier for others. And, like I said, I come home jazzed.
Okay. Are you part of any military organizations in retirement mode now?
Yeah, I'm part of the retired officers. I'm part of 1st Infantry down in Kentini, because
Oh,
I've served with 1st Infantry in Bosnia. That's a funny story. We went to the museum, the 1st Infantry Museum in Kentini, Illinois,
okay.
on a field trip with
And
my
what town is that? I'm trying to remember. It's Winfield, isn't it? Winfield,
right near
Illinois?
Winfield, yeah.
Okay.
And my son, it was a school trip, and I was a chaperone. So my son's in one group, I'm in the other group, and all of a sudden he's got this big booming voice, and he goes, "Mom, were you in Bosnia with the big red one?" I'm thinking, he knows I was, and I yell, "Yes." And I gather what had happened is the docent, who was a World War II veteran, had said, he was talking about the big red one, and my son said, "Well, my mom was in the big red one." He said, "No, she wasn't." And my son said, "Yeah, she was." And he said, "No, she wasn't." "Yeah, she was." And then he hollered it, and I go, "Yes, I was in Bosnia." And it's like everybody looked at him like, "Catch up, dude."
So we're sort of in the part of the interview now where we go over like reflections and stuff like that.
Okay.
So how would you say has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general, since you were part of it?
Well, we should never rush into war. There's always a lot of other things we need to do first, whether it's diplomatic, economic. There's different means. Military weapons should be our last resort. One thing the military hasn't been good on, and it might not be the military's fault, but we're not good at ending these things. And Afghanistan, when we got Osama bin Laden, should have been over. But the White House, the State Department, Department of Defense, they try to export democracy. I don't believe it can be exported. I think it has to be grown. It had to be grown in Iraq. It has to be grown in Afghanistan. It might never be. That might not be what works for them. We've got to stop sending our people for a mission that the people there don't want. And we also need, when the military leaders say it's over, which means if it's not over, it's not over. When Bush had said we were victorious in Iraq, and we weren't yet. And then now we have Trump saying we're victorious with ISIS. No, we're not. Just stop it. The military will know when it's over.
Do you get a sense from having been in Iraq and what goes on there that there is some progress being made? Like you're saying that they're viewing themselves now as trying internally to build their own democratic country, or is that just still impossible?
Well, I would say in Bosnia, they are rebuilding, and all the people are working together. They do not want another war. They learned from it. So there in Bosnia was successful. Iraq, I don't know, because I haven't been back. What I saw was we were making improvements, and then Abu Ghraib came along. We backtracked, and then things were improving, then things got worse again around 2010, and here it is now 2018, and I can't say, but my gosh, we should have been out of there a long time ago.
Right.
You know?
Because that does correlate to your belief that we have been there so long, and either we've made a successful attempt to instill democracy or let them pick it up.
Let them choose their own
but you're right, it
destiny.
almost does feel like we're just sort of treading water.
Yeah. And a young friend of mine, she's a firefighter for the reserve. She just got sent to Afghanistan. And it's like, my prayers are with her every day.
So here's another one of these reflective kind of questions. What message would you like to leave for future generations who are hopefully going to be able to watch this and see you and hear you, whether it's a year from now, whether it's 100 years from now? What would you like to tell them?
One of the most wonderful things about the military is you are taught leadership the day you join, and you are given education, and you're given leadership opportunities. 22 years old, I was commanding a unit along the DMZ. There is no other business or institution where 22-year-olds can be leaders. And so to me, the military is a wonderful career choice. I feel it's kind of like being a priest or a teacher. It should be your calling. But it's a wonderful calling, and you work with fabulous people from all kinds of cultures, and you're working on something bigger than who you are. And for the military, it's never about making money. It's not even about power. It's about providing freedoms and keeping people safe and keeping America safe.
Would you do anything different at all if you had to do something different about your military career?
No. I did say to my husband, when I was in Bosnia, my kids were only 4 and 6 years old. And so I was really concerned about my absence. And so I came home. But I did tell my husband, if I didn't have a family, kids and him, I would have stayed in Bosnia and had gone the nonprofit route.
Wow.
And try and keep helping the people there, because I love that mission. But I had a family, so I came home. So I feel I've gone where I'm supposed to go.
Okay, that's an interesting observation. Since I've been doing all the questions asking here, is there anything that I either haven't asked, or there's something that you would like to just share that you'd like to bring up that we haven't brought up?
Well, one of the things that the Army has taught me is if somebody is good, they will take them and throw them into a position. And what you learn is to fake it till you make it.
Okay.
You have to have the self-confidence, and then you learn fast. We hit the ground running. We really mean that. It's a great attitude to have, because, here I was, a military intelligence officer. Next thing, I'm being taught propaganda, and then how to help a nation, and then they're throwing me into public affairs in front of CNN. And it's like, but they had full confidence I could do it. They had more confidence in me than I did. And that really taught me that you fake it till you make it, and that is a leadership trait.
Okay, that's good to hear. Here's another sort of, again, little good reflective kind of question. What do you wish more people knew about veterans?
I think one of it is that the families suffer as much or more than the service member. So when somebody has gone overseas, offer to help out. One thing, when I went to Bosnia, I knew my husband would not ask for help, not in his nature. So I set up things before I left. I had my church bring over a hot meal every Saturday. I had one woman friend would pick up my daughter once in a while. She did a Mary Kay stuff, so my daughter got to play with that. So I set up a babysitter, but people never. My reserve unit never looked out for my family. Things are better now. They just didn't think of it. Maybe because it's the guy in charge. I don't know. But luckily, I did put in a support system there. So find out, could they just use the long cut? Could they use a babysitter? Are they having problems just, do they need to learn how to do the bills or something? Do they need some time for themselves? So just when you see a family where a member is over, my young friend in Afghanistan, she's got a beautiful boxer. Her biggest concern was who was going to take the boxer while she was gone, because she's a single young lady. And luckily, somebody stepped forward and said, I'll take care of the boxer. So those are the kind of things you forget about, especially with our single soldiers. You forget they might need a car taken care of, and they don't have money to put it in a warehouse for a year. So just see what extra things you can do.
Well, those are good points that you raised. You're right, because you don't think of it.
No, you don't.
And again, the person may be just not open enough to ask for the help and stuff like that. So you have to sense that.
We're going to soldier on.
That's interesting. Anything else that you'd like to say that maybe we haven't brought up?
I don't think so.
Okay. Because I think we're going to get into the conclusion of the interview at this point in time. So I would like to say this does conclude our interview of Colonel Jill Morgenthaler, U.S. Army, retired, for participating in the Veterans History Project. Thank you, Colonel Morgenthaler, for your participation in the project. It means a lot to us as individuals and to the nation as a whole that your story of your military service will live on for all future generations to reflect upon. Thank you so much for sharing with us your story, and thank you again so much for your military service. It has been a privilege and an honor to be able to interview you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ooh.